Hello everyone, welcome back to Atlantic Revolutions, Global Echoes. We are going to compare the Atlantic Revolutions here in Section 2, and I need you to bear with me. We're comparing the North American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and Spanish American Revolutions. It's a lot to get through, so it is a lengthy section. I need you to hang in there with me. Okay, there were some differences between the revolutions, although there were some comparisons. Let's talk about the North American Revolution. That was 1775 to 1787. The basic facts of the American Revolution are well known, but a bigger question is what it changed. The American Revolution was a conservative political movement. It aimed to preserve colonial liberties rather than gain new ones. And for most of the 17th and 18th centuries, British North American colonies really had a lot of local autonomy. And the colonists regarded autonomy as their birthright. Few thought of actually breaking away from Britain before 1750. Now, the differences between England and the North American colonies are significant. Colonial society was far more egalitarian than European society. In manners, British colonists were republican well before the Revolution. So there's a legitimate debate about how revolutionary the American Revolution really was. Well, it did establish a democracy with expanding elaborate and electorate in the coming decades. This was merely the institutionalization of pre-existing social relationships and political patterns. There was no wide-scale social transformation. Britain made a new drive to control the colonies and get more revenue from them in the 1760s. Britain needed money for its global war with France. New taxes and tariffs were imposed on the colonies. Colonists were not represented in British Parliament. Britain appeared to deny the colonists' identity as true Englishmen. Colonial economic interests were challenged, and Britain attacked established colonists' tradition of local autonomy. Now, British North America was revolutionary for the society that had already emerged, not necessarily for the revolution itself. Like I said, there was no significant social transformation that came within independence from Britain, and the revolution accelerated democratic tendencies that were already well established. And the political power remained in the hands of existing elites. English in England, English in America. English settlers in the Americas identified with England and English culture, but they enjoyed the freedoms of life in a land with no hereditary aristocracy, no single church. And economic opportunities stemmed from plentiful land, thanks to the removal of the indigenous population. While a wealthy elite dominated the high politics and higher sectors of the economy, there were various ways for poorer members of society to both make wealth and participate in the decision-making process. And as such, a sense of freedom was central to their identity. As England initially ruled with a rather light hand, they developed an increased sense and practice of autonomy, even though the idea of separation from England was not that common in the mid-century of the American colonies. But, ironically enough, many Americans thought they were creating a new world order. Some acclaimed the United States as the hope and model of the human race, and the Declaration of the Right to Revolution inspired other colonies around the world. And the U.S. Constitution was one of the first lasting efforts to put Enlightenment political ideas into practice. Things changed when England, dealing with war debts from various imperial conflicts, raised taxes and established various tariffs to generate revenue. The Americans were quickly incensed by both the new taxes and the notion they were being unjustly imposed by the English government. They saw England as violating their popular sovereignty. And tax resistance and ideas from the Enlightenment kind of fused together in an anti-English revolt. So a revolutionary society kind of existed before the revolution itself. The revolution did lead to a process where more and more men got the right to vote, and political power remained in the hands of white male elite. There was no radical transformation of society. Okay, and so you've seen this before. The colonies in the Americas that gained their independence from Great Britain. And you'll see right here, Vermont was a disputed land between New York and New Hampshire. Later became its own state. And at the time, Maine is part of Massachusetts. Okay. All right. Comparing Atlantic revolutions continued. Okay, thousands of French soldiers had fought for the American revolutionaries. And the French government was facing bankruptcy because of a lot of what it had put forth into the American War for Independence. The government had long attempted to modernize the tax system and make it fair, but was opposed by the privileged classes. And King Louis XVI called the Estates General into session in a new effort to raise taxes. Of course, that did not go over well. So there is an American connection with ideas and the war debt. There was a direct impact of the American Revolution on the French Revolution. Thousands of soldiers that had served in the American War, many of them encountered radical examples of republicanism and wanted to reform feudal France along those same lines. As France was home to many Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire, the American example spurred the imagination of many French thinkers. In a more concrete way, the French monarchy's support for the American rebels created a massive war debt. And to pay off the debt, like I said, King Louis called the 16th called the Estates General to raise taxes, and thus providing the political opening for the French to start raising their grievances with these new taxes, but also the entire socio-political French system. So when the Estates General convened in 1789, the Third Estate representatives broke loose and declared themselves the National Assembly. When they met, the First and Second Estate had locked the door, and it's rumored that they were locking out the representatives of the Third Estate, the peasants, the commoners, the workers, the farmers, and this was about 97% of the French population. And they got so upset, they went next door, and it was on a handball court, what we would call a tennis court. Thus, the tennis court oath coming that they will continue to meet, regardless of what the First and Second Estate does, until they could help solve these problems and come up with a constitution. And they declared themselves the National Assembly and the true representatives of the French people. And they drew up the ideas that formed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And these actions are what launched the French Revolution. There's a resentment of privilege and increasing radicalism. There was widespread resentment of not just the absolute power of the monarch, but of the social divisions of France. The country was divided into these three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else, which was, like I said, a vast majority of the population. And the first two estates enjoyed various social and economic privileges that ranged from how they dressed to hunting rights to exemption from certain taxes. And resentment of this institutionalized social inequality really exploded in 1789 with mob violence in Paris, peasant unrest in the countryside, and over the next few years, the revolution became increasingly radical with with eventually the 1793 regicide and the ensuing mass executions run by Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety during the Terror. Eventually, the revolutionaries turned on themselves, and Robespierre himself was sent to the guillotine. Now, unlike the American Revolution, the French Revolution was driven by pronounced social conflicts. The titled nobility resisted monarchic efforts to tax them, but the middle class resented those aristocratic privileges. And the urban poor suffered from inflation and unemployment, and the peasants were heavily oppressed by the other two estates. And the Enlightenment ideas gave people a language to articulate these grievances. The French Revolution was violent, far-reaching, and significantly more radical than the American Revolution. It ended hereditary privilege, abolished slavery, at least for a short time. The church was subjected to government authority. At one point, they got rid of Christianity. The king and queen were executed in 1793. The Terror, which lasted a year 1793 to 1794, killed tens of thousands of people that were regarded as enemies of the revolution. And so this is the event that upset things the most, right? It got rid of the Catholic Church, it got rid of Christianity, it got rid of the king, it got rid of the nobility. And so this is a new social establishment with the French. Thus come the efforts to create this wholly new society. 1792 became year one of a new calendar. The country briefly passed a law for universal male suffrage. France was divided into 83 territorial departments. A massive army, about 800,000 men, was created to fight threatening neighbors. And in terms of gender roles, the French Revolution did not create a new society. However, women did participate in the revolution, but efforts to gain political rights ultimately failed. And feelings of French nationalism increased with the revolutionary state at the center. Radicals especially pushed the idea of new beginnings. So the French Revolution was much more a complete revolutionary movement than the American example. The French revolutionaries sought to create an entirely new world based on a rational ordering of things, seen in the new calendar, a new uniform administrative system, and in many ways this was a complete application of the ideas of the Enlightenment. The French Revolution influences spread through conquest. Napoleon Bonaparte, who ruled from 1799 to 1814, he seized power in 1799 and preserved many moderate elements of the revolution, and he was known as the savior of the revolution. He kept social equality but got rid of liberty. His forces subdued most of Europe as he went on those military conquests. He imposed revolutionary practices on conquered regions. But the resentment of French domination stimulated national consciousness throughout Europe. So we see others rising up to defend themselves against the French. And you see here in dark green is the French Empire, and allied with Napoleon. Hopefully you know that, which is kind of ironic, but it's interesting that, at this point in time, the king and queen have been executed. That's Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was Austrian. She's the daughter of Maria Theresa, the Empress of Austria. And so even though the French execute her in their revolution, the Austrian Empire is still allied with Napoleon as he comes in as the savior of the revolution and begins to conquer territories in Europe. Now, what's in orange are dependent states, kind of relied on France. There was some French control, but at war with Napoleon was Russia and Great Britain. Okay, we'll continue with the Haitian Revolution. Okay, Saint Domingue, later called Haiti, was a French Caribbean colony. It was regarded as the richest colony in the world, and a vast majority of the population was slaves. And they vastly outnumbered their masters. Now, the example of the French Revolution sparked a spiral of violence in Haiti. The revolution, though, meant different things to different people. A massive slave revolt began in 1791, and the revolution became a war between a number of factions. Power gradually shifted to the slaves, who were led by a former slave, Toussaint Louverture. And the result was a unique revolution, the only completely successful slave revolt in world history. The country was renamed Haiti, which means mountainous in Taino. Haitians identified themselves with the original native inhabitants. They declared equality for all races, and plantations were divided amongst the small farmers. But the destructiveness of the revolution and the internal divisions and external opposition led to poverty and rather unstable politics. So despite being the richest colony in the world, with about 8,000 slave plantations producing 40% of the world's sugar just in Haiti, and perhaps 50% of its coffee, this French colony was arguably the richest in the world. And we see African slaves, white colonists, and those of color. The colony was home to 500,000 slaves from Africa, 40,000 whites that were divided between the rich Grand Blancs and the poor Petit Blancs, and 30,000 free mixed race. And each group interpreted the French Revolution in a different manner, and each group was suspicious of the others. And thus we see a slave revolt, civil war, and even foreign invasion. As rumors spread, a massive slave revolt erupted, with 1,000 plantations burned and hundreds of whites killed by vengeful slaves. As France lost control of the colony, the various groups formed armies and militias and fought for years in a series of bloody engagements against each other, seeking to take advantage of this situation to gain some advantage in their imperial struggles with France, Britain, and Spain as they invaded. And as we learned about in the French Revolution, with the debt incurred that they helped for the American Revolution, they forced that upon Haiti, and that was also a problem. Haiti's success generated great hope, but also great fear. It created a new insolence among slaves elsewhere and inspired other slave rebellions. It caused horror among white and led to social conservatism, and increased slavery elsewhere, as plantations claimed Haiti's market share. Napoleon's defeat in Haiti also convinced him to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States. Now, Toussaint Louverture was a former slave who united various slave factions, dealt with foreign invaders, defeated Napoleon's forces. However, he was taken prisoner and died in a French jail. But Haiti became a post-slavery republic. And this was truly radical revolution, as the slaves emerged victorious and established a republic in which they were the majority of the citizens. The Haitian leaders spoke openly of avenging the era of colonial slavery, and the revolution served as a symbol of hope for other slaves in the region, but as a serious warning to slave owners. That independence debt that I was talking about, where the French aided in the American War for Independence, sadly, Haiti was forced to pay a massive amount of money to France, and political stability remained elusive. The war, the destruction of the plantations, and the end of significant trade with France really weakened this new nation. Okay, what events are depicted in this engraving? Well, the image shows a black man hanging a large number of French soldiers identifiable by their uniforms. And I know it's not in color, but the victims of these executions include regular soldiers, but there are also some officers, as the head of the hanging victim in the top left corner suggests. Right. Now, the number of gallows leading up the hill gives the scene the appearance of a vast act of retaliation. You can see them. And in fact, the engraving is entitled "Revenge Taken by the Black Army." And what might have prompted the artist to produce this engraving? Well, the artist may have been reacting to news about the victory of Haitian slaves against their oppressors, and the French troops were supposed to quell these slave rebellions. So how did the artist seem to feel about the events in Haiti? Well, the black men pulling up the French soldiers seem joyful and triumphant as they conduct this execution. And the officer, on the other hand, looks graceful even as he is pulled up to the gallows. And the officer hanging on the gallows in the top left-hand corner looks equally noble in death. Even if the artist had sympathy for the cause of the rebelling slaves, it appears as if he identified more with the soldiers as opposed to the slaves. All right. Our last revolutions, the Spanish-American revolutions. Okay, Latin American revolutions were inspired by earlier revolutionary movements. The native-born elites, known as Creoles, in Spanish colonies in Latin America were offended at the Spanish monarchy's efforts to control them in the 18th century. So there's a lot of Creole resentment of Spanish rule and taxes. The native-born elites, who normally self-identified as either white Spaniards or Portuguese, disliked authoritarian rule from Europe and resented taxation by the crown. However, they did not form a united force to fight for independence in the 18th century. The Latin American independence movements were limited at first. Little tradition of local self-government, and the society was more authoritarian with stricter class divisions than, for example, what existed in British North America. Whites were vastly outnumbered, just like they were in Haiti. The Creole elites had revolution thrust upon them by events in Europe. In 1808, Napoleon invaded Spain and Portugal and put royal authority in complete disarray. And Latin Americans were forced to take action. Most of Latin America was independent by 1926. And gaining independence took longer than it did in North America. Latin American societies were torn by class and race and regional divisions, and fear of social rebellion from below really shaped the whole independence movement. Now, when Napoleon invaded the Iberian Peninsula, deposing the Spanish king and forcing the Portuguese king to flee to colonial Brazil, he created a political power vacuum that ultimately led to the colonies demanding their formal independence. And as the Creole elite were very nervous about lower class Indian and slave rebellions, it was difficult for the Latin American revolutionaries to build like a mass movement, like what happened in British North America, the French Revolution, and the Haitian Revolution. So we see independence without a social revolution or even unity. While the Spanish rule was over in most of the Americas by the mid-1820s, there was no social revolution like there was in France. And most of the systems of economic exploitation and social inequality remained intact after their independence movements. With the Creole elites dominating these new nations, there was little in the way of meaningful democracy until the 20th century. And leaders of the independence movements appealed to the lower classes in terms of nativism. All free people born in the Americas were Americanos. Many whites and mestizos regarded themselves as Spanish, but many leaders were liberals, influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. But in reality, the lower classes of Native Americans and slaves got little benefit from independence. Now, women gained little from the independence struggle as well. It proved impossible to unite the various Spanish colonies, just like it was impossible to unite the different classes within one colony, unlike that of the United States. Distances were greater. Colonial experiences were incredibly different. Stronger regional identities existed. And after Latin American independence, relationship with North America slowly reversed. The United States grew wealthier, more democratic, and stable, while the Latin American countries became increasingly underdeveloped, impoverished, undemocratic, and unstable. And you can see here in green are the former Spanish colonies. Blue is the former Portuguese colony. And the remaining colonies after 1830. And the box with the date is their year of independence. So you can see a significant portion of these is in the 1820s, some coming a little bit before 1820, like 1816 in Argentina and 1818 in Chile and 1811 Paraguay. Colombia is in 1819, but most of them are in the 1820s. And that sums up comparing the Atlantic revolutions, North America, the French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, and the Spanish American revolutions. I will see you for Echoes of Revolution.